On behalf of the Annual Conference Committee, I would like to welcome you all to the Distinguished Scholars Session. My name is Elisa Graff, and I am serving as the chair of the ACC, who identify the Distinguished Scholar each year. Since 2001, the Distinguished Scholar Session has celebrated the contributions of notable persons in the field. What is unique about this event is that it brings the honoree together with their colleagues, as well as the scholar's former students. The scholar's remarks usually follow the presentations. The honoree's involvement is important to the series as they continue the conversations that have shaped and will continue to influence art historical scholarship in the future. We welcome you all to this special occasion for applauding, examining, and extending a distinguished career in art history and an opportunity for encouraging dialogue between and among several generations of scholars. It is my pleasure to welcome the 2025 Distinguished Scholar Jack Flam, Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Art and Art History at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center, City University of New York, and the Session Chair, Dr. Lisa Farrington, Distinguished Professor Emeritus in the Department of Art and Music at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, City University of New York, who will formally introduce the 2025 scholar and panelists. Thank you. Dr. Farrington.
Welcome, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'll finish off a little bit of my history by letting you know that in addition to my CUNY connections and history, I am also a former Associate Dean of Fine Arts at Howard University and author for Oxford University Press of two major textbooks or books. One's a textbook on African American art and women's art. I first met Jack Flam in 1984 when he was writing an essay for the MoMA Primitivism in 20th Century Art catalog, and I was working as an assistant to one of the art world's harshest taskmasters, that's our lovely Jack. I'm so busy not pressing the button on the, there we go. Anyway, I worked for this gentleman who was notorious for a variety of things, and his name, the now historic MoMA curator, was William Rubin. And Bill was meeting with Jack to discuss the essay that Jack was writing for the catalog, and he tasked Jack with not writing anything that he was going to write. So that was the day I met Jack Flam. And so, what? Somebody say something? Okay, you could crack a joke. I love it. So Jack was leaving Bill's office, and he's not the kind of person that you say, ordinary things to, because he was outrageously intimidating to most people. But Jack was leaving Bill's office, and he stopped by my desk because I was the friendly face of Bill Rubin at the time. And he said, "Can I please have a copy of Mr. Rubin's essay because I don't want to overlap with anything as he's requested." And I laughed and probably winked and said, "Well, Mr. Flam, I would help you, but Bill hasn't written anything yet." And that was an example of Bill's notorious penchant for setting impossible tasks for others. And between his fiery temper and his brilliant scholarship, he, as I said, intimidated or even frightened nearly everyone around him, except me, of course, which Bill once told me was his favorite thing about me, no fear. At the same time, I had only a master's degree. It wasn't until 6 years later that I decided to go for my PhD at the CUNY Graduate Center, where, to my surprise, I met Jack Flam for a second time. During my 6 years at the Graduate Center, see if I can, there he is, which at that time was on 42nd Street, Jack helped me to overcome several hurdles, including my first oral presentation ever, my written and oral exams, and my dissertation defense. Jack successfully advocated for me when not everybody on my oral exam committee saw my potential. And when just before the exam, he saw me leaving the Graduate Center building, as he was entering it, he came up to me. I assume he thought I was going to ditch the exam and abdicate my spot at the Grad Center. And he said, "Lisa, where are you going?" And I said, I'm just taking a walk before the test. I'm not quitting. But I have to say, I was struck by the fact that he was concerned about me because we didn't know each other that well then. And I'm not sure I would even have completed my PhD if it wasn't for Jack Flam. In fact, I'm almost sure I wouldn't have. That's how special and important he was in my life, and as you'll hear, in the lives of the rest of the panelists. I recall another occasion during my dissertation defense when one of my readers demanded that I not refer to the 1921 film Shuffle Along as a racist film. As a black person, I couldn't comprehend this particular reader's insistence that the film was not racist. I mean, the title alone seemed racist to me. And as our disagreement played out, with the Met Museum curator, Lowry Sims, chiming in my favor, thank goodness, I noticed Jack busily writing in a notepad. I don't know if you even remember this, Jack, but it was vivid. It's vivid in my mind. After a few minutes, he interrupted the now heated discussion and said, "How about this, everybody?" And he proceeded to read a single sentence that he had penned to insert into my dissertation that would please everyone. It acknowledged both the racist elements of this film and its function also as a boon for black actors. This way, Jack finished, Lisa doesn't have to change her pagination. He's so nice. For those of you, I can hear you laughing, who remember typing your dissertations by hand before the invention of word processing software, a pagination change meant potentially retyping dozens of subsequent pages and a veritable nightmare. Jack's concern in that otherwise heated moment was simply to help his mentee survive her defense. Over the next subsequent years, Jack attended art unveilings at my home and lectures that I gave at museums. He helped me find funding for curatorial and writing projects, and most recently, he invited me to edit the latest book in the Documents of 20th Century Art series, a groundbreaking University of California Press series, and this one will be entitled, or is entitled, Black Artists in Their Own Words. As the series editor, Jack advised me throughout every phase of this complicated multi-year process, and the fruits of these labors will be published in September. In addition, when I asked Jack to write the you should have seen that already. When I asked Jack to write the introduction to my next book, The World Before Racism, an Art Story, he reminded me how moved he had been with the content of my talk when I gave it at the Metropolitan Museum. And I put a little arrow in there. I'm sure that's Jack, right there. The book is a gripping and revisionist history of anti-Black racism, told through works of art as truth-sayers, using empirical evidence such as Western art and literature from ancient Egyptian and Greece to the 21st century, as well as things such as Darwin's original texts, which are in fact antithetical to what most believe, and works of literature such as Parsifal from the Middle Ages. The World Before Racism tracks 2,000 years of race relations and conclusively answers these questions: who invented racism, when, and why? With the most unexpected answers. The book presents irrefutable evidence that the ideology of racism is unfounded, unsupported, and destined to fade away like so many other archaic and erroneous ideas. Soon, this is Jack's page spread in his introduction. Soon to be released in digital form, this richly illustrated book is entering the final stages of production to culminate in a sumptuous printed volume for which, by the way, the Artist Book Foundation is actively seeking funding, so please keep the project on your radar. Jack readily agreed to write the introduction, despite the fact that he had a million other things on his plate. Whenever we speak to each other these days to discuss one of our projects, we inevitably fall into a conversation about the complexities of race, life, and art, and how these things overlap. My talks with him have made this book a better work of research. In truth, with 2 books and 4 catalog essays of my own on my plate right now, I would not have agreed to chair a session at CAA for anybody except Jack. Quite organically, I have gone from being an acquaintance of Jack's to a student, mentee, colleague, collaborator, and finally friend. He is an amazing man with a fine mind and a heart to match. So I'd like to introduce now our next speaker, Jennifer Farrell. Since 2014, Jennifer Farrell has been the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Jordan Schnitzer Curator of Modern and Contemporary Prints and Artist Books, where she has curated multiple exhibitions and authored museum bulletins. Prior to this, she held curatorial positions at Yale University Art Gallery, the University of Virginia, and the Whitney Museum's Independent Study Program. Dr. Farrell served as executive director of the Nancy Graves Foundation and taught at the Yale University School of Visual Arts and the American University in Paris, among other institutions. Her book, Get There and Decide Promptly, the Richard Brown Baker Collection of Post-War Art, won the Frick Collection's 2013 Book Prize. Other books by Dr. Farrell include Suzanne McClelland's Stray, Found Poems from a Lost Time, Lucian Freud, Etchings, The History and, I'm sort of stopping in the wrong locations. The History and Legacy of Samuel M. Coutts and the Coutts Gallery, and Modern Times, British Prints, 1913 to 1939. Dr. Farrell earned a BA from Smith College and a PhD, also from the CUNY Graduate Center. She is currently working with the Boston Museum of Fine Arts and Dr. Leslie King Hammond on the exhibit and catalog, which just opened and has just been released, Witnessing Humanity, John Wilson. Please welcome Jennifer Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank CAA for this opportunity and Dr. Lisa Farrington for organizing this event. And most of all, I'd like to thank Jack Flam for all that he has done, including this invitation. It's been wonderful to reread his work and to think about Matisse, especially right now. Jack Flam is revered not only for his remarkable scholarship, but also the impact he has had on generations of students, art historians, artists, and colleagues. His influence extends beyond academia to include the public, who have read his writings, attended his lectures, or seen the exhibitions he curated. And of course, his driving work at the Dedalus Foundation has been absolutely transformative to artists, scholars, and students at local high schools and other institutions. Jack was a distinguished professor of art history at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. As a first-year student, I enrolled in his seminar on Picasso, where much of the class would be devoted to student presentations and related discussions. In a grand example of not knowing what one does not know, I chose La Demoiselle d'Avignon for my paper. As the class was arranged chronologically, it would be the second presentation and my first talk since college. And at this point, I had not even seen a graduate school presentation. Luckily for me, another student chose an even earlier work and had to go first. Jack suggested that we exchange contact information for work, and I suspect to commiserate. We immediately realized the only way we would get through this was to collaborate and share information, essays, ideas, images, and feedback. When she found an article that might be relevant to my project, she made a photocopy for me, and I did the same for her. Now, you will not find either of our papers in any Picasso anthologies or any book for that matter, but we survived. Thus, in addition to Picasso, Jack taught us how essential it is to share information and ideas and to see our classmates as colleagues, not as competitors. The next year, I was Jack's research assistant. I audited his class, Courbet de Cubism, and took notes, which I gave him every Friday. We worked in the morning and then had lunch at a local cafe where we talked about everything under the sun. It was an absolute highlight of the week. Lately, I've had the pleasure of seeing several exhibitions with Jack. As an artist, art historian, and art critic, he has an incredible eye and a range of references, as well as strong opinions. I always discover something new through his observations, something I had not noticed or thought about before. When I was writing about Matisse's jazz recently, Jack sent several emails about the work and the period's political history, noting common errors in the scholarship, including the frequency of images being shown upside down. I remember how he described the prints as, quote, a good example of how extreme circumstances can push an artist to produce extremely new kinds of work, end quote, to which he added, quote, since jazz music was banned by the Nazis, the title itself had political overtones. There is the implied resistance by a man whose daughter was an active resistant, end quote. This is just one example of how Jack has been a generous mentor and consistently provided a wealth of good advice. Whenever I consult him, he always returns calls and emails promptly, and he gave each question or dilemma his full attention, whether it was about scholarly issues, teaching, including what to do with the students who seem to suddenly fall ill on exam day, job applications, or non-academic matters, such as the best high school in the city for my children. Jack's scholarship is marked by both rigor and creativity, an openness to ideas, sources, and references. In his book, Matisse the Dance, Jack provided a detailed study of the works, including specifics such as the address of the garage Matisse rented to paint, as well as analyzing Matisse's conception of dance. In addition to tracing the development of the murals and exploring links to earlier works, he examined the theme and activity of dance in relation to intellectual and social concerns of the period, noting that dance reflected both, quote, physical, social, and moral well-being, and as both sport and physical discipline, it was perceived as an activity beneficial to the French public in its political and economic competition with Germany, end quote. At the same time, he framed the works as representing Matisse's, quote, preoccupation with the potentialities of public art, a different sort of art, one that would be monumental and public, reflecting Christian Zervas's observation that Matisse dreamt of turning painting into a collective activity. This example shows how Jack combined sharp visual analysis with knowledge of an artist's work and concerns, which he then places within the social, political, cultural context in which works were both created and received, providing a new perspective. At my orals, I was shown an image from Breton's Nadia. Jack asked the location, which I provided, and then posed additional questions about such things as nearby monuments and buildings and their histories, testifying to the importance of site and context. And I'm happy to say others on my committee were stumped by this too. It wasn't just me. Jack's attention to context informed my dissertation on Daniel Buren's early work and writings, which I viewed in relation to the social, political, and cultural context from which they emerged and against which he reacted. The topic, in fact, reflects another conversation with Jack. During my orals, Jack asked about the role of the decorative in post-war French art. We discussed Buren, who since the 1960s has worked in situ, employing the decorative as a tool to call attention to the framework in which art is created, received, displayed, and collected, to which we can add studied. Buren also analyzed the decorative in his voluminous writings. Additional connections exist as Buren has engaged Matisse's work both directly and indirectly throughout his career, and Jack's writings have been incredibly important to this study. As a young artist, Buren made pieces that obviously evoked Matisse in a very clear way. Later, with a work like Kaleidoscope, an in situ work at the Stedelijk, he drew colors from Matisse's cutouts. And here's an example of it. From Matisse's cutout, The Parakeet and the Mermaid, from the museum's collection. At the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, Buren's walls of paintings, 20 paintings made between 1966 and 1977 are hung salon-style in the Matisse Room, where they face the Unfinished Dance and the Paris Dance mural. The works can be viewed as both challenging and expanding concepts of the mural, painting, and art broadly considered. As everybody knows, Jack has devoted substantial attention to writings by artists, which he approaches with meticulous attention and intellectual rigor, even revisiting earlier translations decades later. This has also influenced my work, again, on Buren, whose writings, comprising over 4,000 published pages as of 2012, are foundational for thinking about not only his own work, but the function of art and its institutions. Jack wrote about the role of writings in the preface to Matisse on Art and the information they provide. Quote, although Matisse is recognized as one of the most important artists of the 20th century and is the subject of one of the largest literatures in modern art, and although he made public statements about his art for nearly half a century, his writings have been given little attention. In a certain sense, the writings of artists are as much a part of the artistic tradition as the body of works which form that tradition. This heritage, especially in France, has long been part of the artistic culture, which constitutes the basic intellectual milieu of the artist, end quote. Jack more than succeeded in his goal to enable students of modern art and the general public to become familiar with the thought of Matisse, end quote. His work, in fact, transformed how we approach artists' writings. A colleague with particularly rigorous standards described Matisse on Art as her Bible and praised Jack's meticulous research, writing, quote, the footnotes to the writings alone could be turned into 3 monographs, end quote. A project to showcase artists' writings reveals a deep level of respect as well as a remarkable openness and humility. Such an attitude is reflected in Jack's preface to the 1995 revised edition of Matisse on Art, where he discussed the original creation and publication in the 1970s. Quote, this book retains a favored place among my own works, not only because it was the first book I published, but also because it has been especially meaningful and useful to artists. I think that for Matisse, the ideal audience for his writings was one composed mainly of artists and students, end quote. Now, I cite this passage not to make us all feel bad about our own first books, but because it seems that the ideal audience Jack describes appeals to him too, as one can see just looking at this panel. So I'd like to thank you, Jack, for everything that you have done and this wonderful opportunity.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is a practicing artist, Linda Serrone. Sorry. I'm sorry, Linda.
It's okay.
I've never said it wrong before. Serrone was born and raised in the boroughs of New York City as a second-generation Italian-American. In 2001, she graduated with a degree in fine arts, painting, and secondary education from Brooklyn College. Serrone has exhibited art throughout the Mid-Atlantic region and in New York since 1992. She has taught for the past 25 years while collaborating with public institutions on art projects to enrich their concepts of art and to create portfolio materials for their students' future art journeys. Serrone has a strong background working in the fine arts conservation framing industry, wherein she consults and works on special projects. Her upbringing and sensibility as someone who engages in her community grows stronger each year. She has become an avid, collaborative artist, creating city-sized murals in and out of her own neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, where she keeps a studio in the Borough Park neighborhood. Please welcome Linda Serrone. And don't forget to visit her website, Linda Serrone, Rolon, ROLON.com.
Thank you so much. There's something about Professor Jack Flam who offers you the lighter side of things when looking and thinking about art. The tone in which he speaks and explains details have left my ears and eyes pinned to his next group of words and images. The subjects, the stories, and the truth behind it all are the ingredients for this great historian, educator, mentor, and friend who has helped me throughout my life a great deal, ever since I met him. When I was getting to know Dr. Flam as a mentor, he was my professor first at Brooklyn College. As an undergraduate who got permission to take graduate art courses through his art history classes, Professor Flam taught me art is life and life is art. My career trajectory during my years at Brooklyn College led me to getting fired from waiting tables and shaking that boss's hand, thankfully, to be forced to move on and only working in or with the arts for the rest of my life thus far. With Dr. Flam's classes and studio visits, I was introduced to a world beyond pictures. There were stories and true stories behind the art he showed us and the artists who made the art. I learned there is true poetry behind this art making. Until this day, I am in check to keep living my own truth, and thankfully for his mentorship beyond my years at Brooklyn College. Those Brooklyn College years with Dr. Flam encouraging me to be art club president, curator at the student gallery at Boylan Hall, and we petitioned for undergraduate art studios, which Dr. Flam frequented, and they still exist today. This was truly a different undergraduate CUNY experience. I was making sculptures rather than writing papers. I was paying homage in paint rather than writing words, because he knew I was capable, or at least curious, what I would do with this type of guidance. I was a very enthusiastic student, and I felt strongly seen by him. You see, as a young person, I kept my art life hidden, always drawing with the ballpoint pen, creating muscle memory without even know what I was doing or anyone telling me what I was doing. I did not go to art school or even know it existed, even though I grew up in New York City. So meeting Dr. Flam in my last years of college were a really big deal. He made me see my own abilities while accepting and questioning my work in a very positive way. This was and still is my lifestyle. The mentorship continued beyond Brooklyn College as I continued to commit my life to art employment and art making only. During Brooklyn College, I worked at Soho 20 Gallery, interned with Anna Sui for 3 seasons, and taught art for 3 years strong at the Door in Soho in New York City. And after graduation, I had an opportunity to live and make art on a semi-abandoned estate on the eastern shore of Maryland with my boyfriend at the time. This was the lifestyle I imagined as Professor Flam spoke about Matisse and Picasso and Pissarro and Cezanne. I felt I had arrived, living in almost isolation where I made some of my favorite paintings, because art was my life and my life was becoming art. Eventually, I ran out of money and got a job in a picture framing shop nearby, where I protected art, and I was becoming part of this art's history. Becoming employed as a fine art framer and eventually a paper proprietor and designer made me feel the intimacy I felt when looking at slides during Dr. Flam's classes. This big part of my life comes from the education Dr. Flam provided. It led me into this great career of conservation and preservation framing for artists and galleries. Oh, I have pictures, right? Okay. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, I forgot what they were. Okay. Yeah, let me just, I'll finish this paragraph, excuse me. This is my first time doing this, so yay. Okay. This big part of my life comes from the education Dr. Flam provided. It led me into this great career of conservation and preservation framing for artists and galleries, etc., while keeping up my art studio. This was the only way to live. The fantasy turned reality. 3 years after Maryland, moving back home to New York City, life does what it does and storms happened, literally. Dr. Flam, through the Dedalus Foundation, built a recovery center for all the art damage during Hurricane Sandy. Coincidentally, starting my newly found profession as a framer, now in New York City, I was already in tune to protecting art. So this tragedy, losing major parts of my own life's work due to Hurricane Sandy, led me to a more conservation community and strengthened me as a conservation framer who was also supplies with papers and materials from the Recovery Center, which I still use today. They gave me a lot. At the time, I had a 4-year-old son, a 90-year-old grandfather, and a house half underwater. My art was at the bottom of the totem, and that Recovery Center saved my soul, and once again gave me the strength and ability to see myself through such a tumultuous time, allowing me to elevate my art practice again while keeping myself employed still in the arts. Because of Dr. Flam's recommendation, he was the head of the Dedalus Foundation, I was hired to work in the Dedalus Gallery at Industry City, and I taught art for the Sunset Park community. Crossing over art and life, my son and his friend attended the art classes, and I met some of Dr. Flam's family who visited the public workshops Dedalus provided. And I saw Dr. Flam, his own huge stepping stone after his years at Brooklyn College. While Dr. Flam was mentoring me, I was also so proud of him running such a generous programmed foundation that kept reaching out to community that changed lives besides my own. Till this day, another very committed student of Dr. Flam's and one of my dearest friends and comrades, we ask ourselves during each other's studio visits, what would Professor Flam say? I am so thankful because I sit here today strongly making art every day, because without art, there is no life. Thank you, Dr. Flam. My life choices have been truly directed towards how art changes us and how it can affect us. I chose to stick to painting and drawing people and human expressions because being seen is one of the hardest things to do. My art making is a part of a universal language where another human can relate and connect to whether they understand. Sorry, oh, I thought there was another one. Sorry. Okay. My art making is a part of a universal language where another human can relate and connect to, whether they understand anything about painting. My life's work is mostly about seeing people and communicating with people so they and their situations are never forgotten. Being here today is because Dr. Jack Flam encourages and believes in the process of art making and the lifestyle it takes to live, which is just important as the art. Thank you so much, Dr. Flam. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce next Julie Reiss, who is an art historian and critic with a focus on the role artists can play in social change. She is the editor of the 2018 anthology, Art, Theory, and Practice in the Anthropocene, a pioneering scholar in the field of installation art, and the author of the MIT Press book, From Margin to Center, The Spaces of Installation Art. In 2019, Reiss organized the symposium, The Role of Art in the Environmental Crisis, held at Christie's Education, and was the guest critic on the same theme for the Brooklyn Rail. She has since lectured extensively on art and climate and conducted numerous related interviews with artists for the Rail. Dr. Reiss teaches courses on art and sustainability at Columbia University and is a visiting critic to Columbia's MFA program. Previously, she was Director of Modern and Contemporary Art and the Market, an MA program at Christie's Education, and Dr. Reiss earned her PhD in art history from the CUNY Graduate Center. Welcome, Dr. Reiss.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to Jack Flam for inviting me to be part of this. I got a phone call about 6 months ago, and there he was at the other end of the line, and that was exciting, and it's actually given me an opportunity to go back to remembering a lot of things that I hadn't thought about for a while and thinking about how important they have been to me. So I have two stories I would like to share in which Jack Flam played a pivotal role in my trajectory. The first pertains to my doctoral dissertation. The year was 1992. I was finishing the PhD program in art history at the CUNY Graduate Center while working as assistant curator of contemporary art at the Jewish Museum. At the museum, I was liaising with artists who had been invited to create site-specific installations for an upcoming group exhibition. I found it fascinating to watch the artists' projects develop from concept to finish within the museum's galleries. Compared to curating pre-existing artwork, the process seemed like a leap of faith on the part of the institution. I wondered how installation art, antithetical to collection and preservation, had become a museum form. I decided then to write my dissertation on installation art, although the topic had only rarely come up in the art history classes I had taken. At the time, there was very little literature on the subject, and even fewer photographs. Mine wouldn't be the more typical monographic dissertation. Instead, I would track the recognition of installation art as a genre and its move from alternative spaces into the museum. I wanted to start with Alan Caprow in 1958 and go up to the present, well past the 1945 cutoff that was implicit then for dissertations even in the CUNY program, with its notable concentration in 20th century art. I knew from the start that I wanted to work with Jack Flam if he would agree. I had loved the courses he taught on Matisse and Picasso, but I was always aware that he had other interests, from African sculpture to contemporary criticism. From the moment that I called him and told him that I wanted to write on installation art, he said that it sounded exciting and agreed to be my first reader. He told me it was going to be an important dissertation and seemed unconcerned by the lack of documentation that might hinder my research. I can still remember where I was standing when we had that phone call. I hung up feeling an incredible sense of possibility and excitement. Because of the unconventional nature of the topic, it took several tries to get my proposal approved by the art history department, but it eventually went through, I suspect riding heavily on the strength of Jack's support. I defended my dissertation in 1996. The response at my defense was somewhat lukewarm. I remember being asked some insubstantial questions by my committee, such as, why didn't you fly out to California to see Alan Caprow in person instead of interviewing him on the phone? One committee member commented that it was too bad that my dissertation topic emerged from my job at the museum, rather than from a purely intellectual inquiry. It went on in that vein. Then Jack spoke up. He said essentially that no one in the room was appreciating what I had accomplished, that I had made something out of nothing. I passed my defense that day and graduated a newly minted PhD. My dissertation became the book From Margin to Center, The Spaces of Installation Art, the first scholarly history of installation art in America, published in 1999 by the MIT Press. Throughout the year I spent turning my dissertation into the manuscript for the book, Jack stayed engaged with the project, just as he had been when I was his student, coaching and encouraging me through the publishing process and generous with his time and attention. When the book came out, he wrote me a note saying he hoped that I felt as proud of myself as I should be, that the book was a real accomplishment. In retrospect, it was a shared accomplishment. Jack wasn't simply indulging me when he supported the project. He supported it because he recognized the need for a scholarly investigation of installation art, perhaps even more than I did at the time. From Margin to Center has held up well. and I'm happy to say that over time it gradually took its place as a foundational piece of scholarship on installation art, referenced and quoted in most subsequent books on the subject. Reviews of the book were positive, particularly regarding my methodology, which reflected the meticulous research, both contextual and documentary, that I had learned to perform as Jack's student. Jack's defense of my dissertation and its subsequent success as a book gave me the courage to continue to follow my own convictions. In my most recent work, I have focused on contemporary art related to the climate crisis. After giving a paper on art in the Anthropocene at CAA in 2018, I edited an anthology on the subject while organizing a related symposium at Christie's. That same year, Jack invited me to participate on a panel on installation art at the Dedalus Foundation. We got to talking about what I was currently working on with art and climate change. It was still a fairly marginal topic, but once again, he was encouraging about my interest. He introduced me to Fong Bui, editor of the Brooklyn Rail. Fong invited me to be guest critic for the Rail on art in the climate crisis, giving me a platform to which I could invite 10 artists to contribute. Their statements and my conversations with them clinched my sense of the important role that art can play in building equitable and sustainable environmental futures. Today, I teach courses on art and climate change and art and sustainability. I'm hardly the only one in this field, but I arrived there on the early side, and channeling Jack, I wasn't daunted by the relatively sparse scholarship available. I've learned to teach this timely subject across disciplinary boundaries, first at Stony Brook University's School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, and now at Columbia University's School of Professional Studies. At Columbia, my art and sustainability course is the sole humanities offering in an MS program in sustainability management. My students want to save the planet. I tell them what Gerhard Richter once said, that art is the highest form of hope. To conclude, I'm deeply grateful to Jack for his support and mentorship at several crucial junctures in my career. As his former student and a teacher myself, I've also come to appreciate just how effectively he shared his passions with his students. When I saw Matisse's open window at Collioure hanging in an exhibition at the Met last fall, I experienced a bolt of joyful recognition as one gets from recognizing a dear friend from across the room. Those Matisse classes were the best days. Thank you, Professor Flam.
I have a quick question. Is John Yao here? Okay. If you get here, John, let me know. I'm teleporting that information. I'd like to introduce now Deborah Cullen-Morales. Dr. Cullen-Morales is a senior program officer for arts and culture at the Mellon Foundation, the nation's largest supporter of the arts and humanities. I should stop there. I was Associate Dean at Howard University of Fine Arts, desperately looking for money. And out of the blue, I got a call from Deborah Cullen-Morales. Hi, Lisa, remember me from New York? Do you need any money? Anyway, we had an amazing collaboration with the Mellon Foundation and the university. So thank you again for the millionth time. Does anybody ever ask that question? No. Anyway, as you know, the Mellon is the nation's largest supporter of the arts and humanities. Dr. Cullen-Morales has served as executive director of the Bronx Museum of the Arts, director and chief curator of the Wallach Art Gallery at Columbia University, director of curatorial programs at El Museo del Barrio, and curator of the print collection at Robert Blackburn's Print Workshop, an organization with which she maintains a long affiliation. An art historian and curator who focuses on modern and contemporary Latinx, Caribbean, and African American art, Cullen-Morales has curated and written extensively. The anthology she co-edited with Rocio Aranda Alvarado, a handbook of Latinx art, will soon be available from the aforementioned documents of 20th century art, the flagship art series for the University of California Press, which Dr. Flam edits. Welcome, Deborah Cullen-Morales.
So I think of this as a story between two books. I just have a few reflections on how my life has intertwined with Dr. Flam. That was, like others have said, was, amazing to rehearse after all these years. I met Dr. Jack Flam shortly after I enrolled in the art history program at the CUNY Graduate Center in fall of 1991. I was coming in as a postgraduate special student without a master's degree and with a bachelor's degree, a BFA in painting and sculpture from School of Visual Arts. So I was in awe, and I was learning how to be an art historian. Although I never wanted to be an academic, I thought the curatorial path was for me. I was assigned to assist Dr. Flam as part of my work study award. Flam was working on his Matisse, the dance publication for the National Gallery of Art, which opened in January of 1993. It was through this work with Jack that I first learned the many intricacies of word processing. Something you young people don't remember, because there didn't used to be computers, as someone else here my age mentioned. I learned keyboard shortcuts, footnoting, all these things that I didn't know how to do because I had just used a typewriter up to that point. But somehow Dr. Flam was very, very patient with me. And so as he was speaking his text and I was taking notes and typing for him, I was learning all the best practices to make a publication, something I didn't think I was going to learn when I went to graduate school. And this has served me well. As I followed up on research for him, we continued to spend time together, and I took several of his classes. In fall of 1992, I took his Matisse and Modernism course, which coincided with the major Matisse retrospective at the MoMA. It was a fantastic opportunity to have all the Matisse works nearby while we studied. And yes, they became old friends, which I had just looked at as a painter, but now was thinking of through the lens of art history. That was so richly illuminated by Dr. Flam's presentations in the class. In the fall of 1993, I took Fauvism and Cubism course, delving deeper into this area that I hadn't really explored before. And in fall of 1994, I audited his Primitivism course. Professor Flam's courses offered a grounding in important art historical issues that I had only seen previously as an artist, and these would resonate throughout my career. I went to art history school for the worst possible reason. I was just interested. So this really allowed me to dig deeply and to learn the right way to do things. I continued to work for him, and I would say we became friendly. There were many, many challenging moments because I was working at the same time for Robert Blackburn at the printmaking workshop, members of which are here. And funding was always an issue. The workshop, although it still exists, was always still struggles with funding, as all nonprofits do. And Bob himself was an incredibly important mentor to me, and he was getting older and living very much on the edge, and I was really worried about him. I recall many times discussing the struggles and issues of an artist-run not-for-profit with Dr. Flam, and my deep respect for Bob, but also my frustration with him. And Jack was always interested, patient, gentle, and helpful in giving advice. And it was so important to me that he made time to listen to this part of my life and my work, because I didn't have many other professional mentors to talk to about this work. I was also a student representative at the CUNY Grad Center from 93 to 94, and it was during a faculty hire, so we had occasion to spend more time together. Because Dr. Flam was on the executive committee, and we had various interactions during that hire as the representatives had to attend all the talks and some of the dinners with the candidates. And then Dr. Flam later served on my oral examination committee in May of 1996. I didn't finish my dissertation, Robert Blackburn, American Printmaker, until the fall of 1992 because I started to work at El Museo del Barrio in 1997 and thought I'd just stay there while I finished, and it took quite a while because I was still working. Working somewhat for Bob, working at El Museo and trying to finish my dissertation, but we maintained a connection on and off over the years, I realized in looking back. For example, I knew of his involvement with the Dedalus Foundation, and then the foundation became supportive of several projects that we did at El Museo del Barrio. In fall of 2009, the foundation collaborated on Nexus New York, Latin American Artists in the Modern Metropolis, a major historical undertaking that explored the interactions between Caribbean and Latin American artists and US-born and European artists working in New York in the early part of the 20th century, who together fomented many of the era's most important avant-garde movements. Nexus New York was the first exhibit to explore the profound ways these artistic exchanges impacted art and art movements in the city and throughout the world for years to come, and the Dedalus Foundation was crucial to its success. These connections and exchanges included Mata, who arrived in New York in 1939 and who later traveled with his Atelier 17 colleague, Robert Motherwell, to Mexico in 1941. Their intense and close connection was featured in a gallery of Nexus New York at El Museo, and with works from Motherwell's Mexican sketchbook borrowed from the foundation, and several of Mata's paintings from the period. And Katie Rogers, now president and CEO of the Dedalus Foundation, wrote the essay To Transform the World, Mata and Motherwell in New York and Mexico, for a publication which we produced in collaboration with Yale University Press. I was so proud of that project that I curated, and the Dedalus Foundation, Jack and Katie, were so important to it. Later in 2012, the foundation again supported another exhibition publication, Caribbean Art at the Crossroads of the World, which we wouldn't have been able to make without the help of the Dedalus Foundation. Jack's deep involvement as a scholar in the world of the artist-endowed foundation, in the world of artist-endowed foundations, was the reason for his earlier sincere interest in my work with Blackburn, I think, as well as his sincere interest in me and my working with him. And his sensitivity and supportiveness of my work there buoyed me in tough times and served as a model for me when I took on Blackburn's estate after Bob passed in 2003 and tried to promote his work and his rightful place in art history, just as Jack did for Robert Motherwell, Judith Rothschild, and so many others. At El Museo del Barrio, where I worked for 15 years, I know I said I'd only go there for a year or two when I finished my dissertation, but 15 years later, I was still there. After I left, I directed the Wallach Art Gallery at Columbia University, where Dr. Flam was a graduate of the MA program in art history, and so I had occasion to see him there from time to time at art history events, and always relished seeing him there and his involvement as he maintained with Columbia. Before starting my most recent job at the Mellon Foundation, between jobs, I reconnected with Dr. Flam. He was seeking to line up additional books for the series he edited, founded by Robert Motherwell, The Documents of 20th Century Art, which has been referenced so many times here. This series focuses on artists' writings. That led to his invitation in the first year of the pandemic to edit a project highlighting Latinx art that I proposed with my dear friend, El Museo colleague, and fellow CUNY graduate, Rocio Aranda Alvarado. This has led to the publication now that is on the table at the UC Press display here in the book fair, a handbook of Latinx art. You can get a 40% discount if you buy it here. Go use the coupon, so go buy it. In many ways, this journey, my journey, was modeled, supported, and inspired by all that Dr. Jack Flam has done. I want to close here with some of Jack's own words. In preparing for the panel, I was reading his oral history in the Archives of American Art that was conducted in 2017. I was surprised, I didn't know, in reading this interview to learn that Jack, like me, also started as an artist and continues to take pleasure in privately making his work. I think this makes us better art historians, more sensitive to the needs of artists and in looking at art. Anyway, here is Dr. Flam speaking, the words I'd like to close with that ring really true to me, and I think you too. One of the things that I learned from my work on Matisse is that you can never take the literature on an artist for granted. An irony that I think of sometimes is one of my first publications on Matisse was a paper that I gave at the International Congress of the History of Art in 1969. It was called Matisse in 1911 at the Crossroads of Modern Painting. I bring this up simply because of the paintings that I discussed by Matisse that were supposedly done in 1911. Later, when I started doing research for Matisse, The Man and His Art, which was published in 1986, I would say that half of those paintings were actually not done in 1911. And that one of the things that I found really interesting is that once you begin to dig below, beneath the surface of research on an artist, you realize that there is a whole history that remains to be written. I couldn't have said it better. It's this history that remains to be written, following the lead of artists, that inspires us in the work we do. It's exactly the reason for the need for something such as a handbook of Latinx art that Dr. Flam understood was needed. I want to thank Dr. Flam for his work, his mentorship, and the various ways of supporting me in my own working career over all these years. Thank you.
As you heard earlier, Dr. Jack Flam is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Art and Art History at CUNY's Brooklyn College and its Graduate Center, where he taught for almost 50 years. He served as a truly caring mentor and dissertation supervisor to so many, including myself. He's one of the foremost scholars, if not the foremost scholar, on Matisse, having authored Matisse on Art, 1973, Matisse, The Man and His Art, which received CAA's Charles Rufus Moray Award in 1988, Matisse, The Dance, which we've heard about from Dr. Farrell in 1993, and Matisse and Picasso, The Story of Their Rivalry and Friendship in 2003. Other influential works by Dr. Flam include books on Motherwell, Diebenkorn, Smithson, Monet, and African art and modernism, including his contribution to MoMA's publication on primitivism and 20th century art, and his own subsequent co-authored book on the subject. Jack is also, as we have discussed multiple times, series editor of the long-running Documents of 20th Century Art. Not sure if I have that up there. Which has produced nearly 20 books in over 30 years. Dr. Flam has been a member of the board of directors of the Dedalus Foundation since 1991 and was its president and CEO from 2002 until just a few months ago. He also served on the boards of the Bard Graduate Center's journal Source, Notes in the History of Art, and the International Association of Art Critics, and he was the art critic of the Wall Street Journal from 1984 to 1992, for which he won the Hanover Prize for Distinguished Newspaper Criticism in 1987 and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. In addition to writing for the Wall Street Journal, Dr. Flam has contributed articles to, among many periodicals, African Arts, the Art Bulletin, Art Forum, Art in America, Art International, Art Journal, Art News, Connaissance des Arts, Art Magazine, Connoisseur, Le Journal de la Société des Africanistes, Leonardo, Storia dell'Arte, and the Times Literary Supplement. And Guggenheim and NEA fellowships count among his many awards. This brief biography of Dr. Flam barely touches on his accomplishments and amazing network of scholars, curators, and collectors. For example, some years ago, I was fortunate to see the original art collection of the billionaire Steve Wynn on display at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, not expecting to run into any artsy types there. It was a stunning aggregate of paintings ranging from Rembrandt to Picasso installed on dark walls, with the only gallery lighting being a single spotlight on each work. I was overwhelmed by the installation and the art, and deep in my thoughts, I wandered into the bookstore at the end of the exhibit. There, to my amazement, was a catalog of the collection containing essays by none other than Jack Flam. With that, allow me to introduce you to the man of the hour, Dr. Jack Flam.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you all for coming. I want to start by saying that I've learned more, or at least as much, from my students as they've learned from me. And I mean that sincerely. And hearing their presentations, you can see why. They've expanded my horizons. They've made me think about things that I myself would not have thought of. And if I may tell a little anecdote with Lisa, Lisa told me she wanted me to be her dissertation advisor. But she said, I'm not sure if you're going to want to do it. I want to write about a Black woman artist. And I said, well, sure, I'm for it. My only requirement is that it be someone as good as Billie Holiday. And she did it. She chose an artist that I had barely heard of. I mean, I knew the name. I don't even know that I knew Faith Ringgold's work at the time. And in ways like that, Julie wanting to do installation art. I mean, everybody at the table here has done things that have expanded my horizons. So if they've learned a lot from me, I've learned at least as much from them. I also want to thank all of you for coming. And I want to welcome in particular one of my former students. You notice that I've only invited former students. The choice is students and or colleagues, but my former students are my colleagues. I'm just old enough to be able to say that. And also, I wanted to have the kind of interaction that one has with one's former students, where you've kind of lived through things together in parallel, not only laterally. Anyway, I want to welcome one of my students from the second year I was teaching. In 1962 was the first course he took with me. We've been in touch since. It's Robert Lee. Many of you know his name. He was the co-founding director and still is the director of the Asian American Arts Center, which is an extraordinary organization that's done marvelous work, based for a long time on Bowery in Chinatown. They've moved now, but they're still active. And I just want to thank you, Bob, for coming. I can't tell you how moved I was. This is over 1962. That's 63 years ago. I also want to thank the College Art Association for conferring this award on me, which I find deeply moving. And I should say that the College Art Association has played a real role in my own career, in several aspects of my career. The very first public lecture I gave about Matisse was at the 1969 College Art Association conference in Boston. And that paper, which attracted attention of various people, which is why I was invited to give that paper at the International Congress of the History of Art. Colin Eisler actually was at the lecture, and he wanted me to give the talk at the International Congress. And those 1911 paintings, which has been pointed out later on, I realized almost none of them were really done in 1911. But in any case, what I started to say is that that lecture was published in Art Journal a couple of years later. And as you all know, Art Journal is a publication of the College Art Association. Also, I should say that in 1966, I had gone to the CAA conference largely out of curiosity, and I got into a conversation with somebody that led to my being hired as a visiting assistant professor at the University of Florida, supposedly for a one-year gig. And I liked it so much, and they liked me. So I stayed there for 4 years. And that changed my life in a number of ways. It got me out of the New York area for the first time in my life, actually. And eventually it formed a bridge for me to go to Paris to work on my Matisse on art book. So the CAA has played a real role in my own life. I also want to say something else about the College Art Association, which with the passage of time perhaps is not quite self-evident, which is that it's played an enormously strong role in legitimizing and supporting the study of art and art history in the United States. When I was an undergraduate, I had a dual major. I was a major in both art and English. And all the English professors and my history professors, all the other outside the art department professors would say to me, art really isn't an academic discipline for a college. Somehow or other, art was some kind of fluffy stuff that wasn't really academic. And that was an attitude that existed for quite a long time. I'm talking now about 1957, 8, 9, but that persisted well into the 60s. And the College Art Association has always been an advocate for legitimizing, for making the study of art as legitimate as the study of literature, in the same way that the MLA, the Modern Language Association, was so supportive of literature as not only an academic discipline, but as a culturally valid activity, something to do. I should also say, this being the United States of America, the CAA was helped along, so to speak, by the Metropolitan Museum buying Rembrandt's Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer for $2.3 million in 1961, the highest price ever paid for a painting. And I have to say, after that, the art classes were filled with many, many more students. That had an enormous effect. And of course, looking back at it, there's yet another irony. $2.3 million is chump change today on the art market. In any case, I'd like to say also that in both my teaching and in my scholarship, I've emphasized the importance of looking carefully at works of art and of writing as clearly as possible. These are the two things that have been most important to me, and I think that I've conveyed most clearly to my students. The importance of looking carefully, I think, was something that was honed by my own experience studying painting when I started out. And my passion for writing is something that must have come from, of course, not must have, it surely came from my study of literature, going back to the time I was an undergraduate and even well before that. Throughout my career, I've also had the really good luck of studying in public institutions, public colleges and universities, where the art department combined studio and art history. So all the undergraduate students had to take courses in studio art and art history both, no matter what their specialty was. And it allowed for an enormous amount of crossover and a lot of stimulation, because what happens is that you're up against different kinds of sensibilities. And I had the same good luck teaching, most especially at Brooklyn College, where I was teaching MFA students, some of whom are in the room here today, and who are successful artists, and even BFA students, such as Linda, whom I'm still in touch with. I know Michael Kelly Williams is here, Slava Polishek is here. I'm just the people that I see right off with my students, from graduate students from Brooklyn. So I've had that wonderful experience of teaching artists at the same time that I'm teaching art historians on both the master's level and the PhD level. And as a result, I was able to absorb from them different kinds of sensibilities, different kinds of approaches which I think have made me a better scholar, a better writer, and maybe even a better human being. The other thing is that in my teaching, I've encouraged my students to go beyond preconceived ideas. That's something that's been very important to me. And in fact, I would say, even though it may seem odd to you, that my resistance to preconceptions was part of what led me originally to Matisse. Although it may seem very strange, when I started working on, or when I first started thinking about writing about Matisse in the mid-1960s, people thought I was crazy. Matisse, you know, it's colorful, it's bright, but it's not really very significant. And whatever else has been, whatever's to be done about Matisse has already been done by Alfred Barr in his 1951 book. Matisse was not deep enough to study. In fact, as late as the 1970 exhibition in Paris, the retrospective, a very prominent art critic, Dennis Sutton, wrote, and I quote, that Matisse was so easy on the eye and in no way profound, end quote. Whereas I was finding that if you actually looked at Matisse, you found that he was very challenging to the eye and very, very deeply profound. It had to do, again, with looking and getting past preconceptions. Similarly, when I had the idea of translating and collecting Matisse's writings, people, again, I mean, well-established people said to me, that's crazy. It's a waste of time. And the reason it was a waste of time, because everybody knows that Matisse doesn't have any particularly interesting theoretical position. And because he doesn't have a theoretical position, he's not going to be of any interest at all whatsoever, either to artists or to art historians. And I felt, in fact, the opposite. I felt that it was the very openness of Matisse that made him so interesting, and that I thought would make his writing so valuable to other people, art historians and artists alike. And in fact, in 1939, Matisse himself put it in a very pithy way. He wrote, to sum up, I work without theory, and that's italicized, that's underlined in the text. I am conscious only of the forces I use, and I am driven by an idea that I really only grasp as it grows with the picture. And I could say that in a similar way, I might characterize my own approach to thinking and writing about works of art is one of letting ideas develop from the experience of looking at the work carefully, with an open mind, and over time. What I've been engaged in and what I've taught is a kind of close reading in which you don't see what you had as a preconception. You don't look for your own preconceptions, but you look to see what is in the picture and what are the implications of what's in the picture in terms of expressivity and in terms of historical relevance, by seeing things as clearly as possible. In fact, John Yao, who was supposed to be here but apparently hasn't shown up, who was one of my students, put it very nicely in an essay about why Wilfredo Lamb's The Jungle for many years was never shown in the Museum of Modern Art galleries, but was confined to the lobby. And what John says is that the reason was that the MoMA curators, and I quote, see in Lamb only what is in their own eyes, end quote. And refusing, which he means by that, refusing to see Lamb in his own terms, to see him coming out of Afro-Cuban culture, for example, seeing him only in relation to the Western, European tradition. And I think that John's words sum up for me also something that's very important. When you're looking at a work of art, you don't want to only see what's in your own eyes. You want to see what's in the work of art. You want to see what there is that can expand you and make you reach out into unexplored areas of yourself, among other things. Finally, I'd like to add that my friendship with Robert Motherwell grew out of our shared love of painting and of the written word, and also resistance to received ideas, which is very important to Bob. And it was something that eventually led to my second career with the Dedalus Foundation, which he created, and which has been so deeply stimulating and fulfilling to me in so many different ways. So I want to thank you all again for coming, and give the floor back to Lisa.
We have 35 minutes or so remaining, and what we'd like to do for part of that time is have a conversation about today's topics amongst the panelists, and that would be followed by 15 minutes or so of questions from the audience, for which there are microphones, or at least one microphone set up. So think about your questions, and if you want to ask, just come up to the mic as we're finishing up our roundtable discussion, and we'll see if we can't answer. Okay? All right. So can you, am I coming across? I'd like to start with a few questions for our panelists. My first question is directed to you, Jennifer. I wonder if you would tell us all a little bit more about your experience as Jack's research assistant as well as his student.
Okay. Well, it was really fantastic. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, studying with Jack, that was a little bit like jumping in the deep end as a first-year student. That was really incredible. And I should say also that my paper on Picasso, when I turned it in, he returned it later with notes, and he said, you know, you might want to think about some passages to tweak. So he also graciously offered to reread that. So I think that kind of really mentoring environment is something that's so important. As his research assistant, it was absolutely fantastic because I didn't have to present papers. I could just sit there and listen to everybody else and listen to his fabulous notes. I think it was a class versus a seminar. So he was doing most of the teaching, and it was wonderful to be able to transcribe and make notes of what other people had said. And then to reflect on it again. I got to go through it as I would type them up. And then on Friday, I would give them to him, and we would go over other projects and other writings. And then we always had lunch afterwards at a place on the Upper West Side. And it was just such a nice end to the week. I would come out feeling very inspired. I mean, I think often the last thing people want to do is dive into work on Friday afternoon or evening, but I usually did after that. So it was really, I think when you're in graduate school, it's all about deadlines and assignments in this compressed time period, and sometimes we forget the fun of what we do, the creativity and the inspiration, and I always came back renewed with that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Linda, you said something when you were speaking about being seen, and how, not just seeing, but being seen, and how that experience was so important to you during those years when you were Jack's mentee. Could you tell us a little more about what you mean by that?
Well, being seen is definitely one of the toughest things, and now today most time-consuming, and social media proves that.
You
But
mean
as-
being seen as an artist?
just being seen in general.
Wow.
I feel like, as a young person, I invented my own art practice. I grew up in Staten Island and there was no art. I didn't have art until I think my junior year in high school in Sheepshead Bay. And yeah, so it was just, I went to CUNY and I took art classes and I did the whole everything. I was like, oh my God, I love art. But there's something when you're beyond studying and a teacher takes notice. And that's what Jack did. He was like, listen, you should do this, you should do that. Or why are you doing this? Like I worked with the ballpoint pen out of just survival or whatever, traveling back and forth to the city. And yeah, so as a young, just like being an older person now, realizing that being seen is one of the hardest and most important things. And from that, I mean, it feels or seems basic, but I've been working on a project for the past 3 years, and it's all about being seen. And I'm doing a project that's based on my brother, who I lost 3 times. And it's crazy because just from having this example, in my own education, it just gives me a little bit of a platform. And I feel responsible as an artist to notice people, especially the youth, And I mean, I'm older, but I still feel quite 20, especially in your studio, it just, anything goes. But it's definitely became, so I'm working on this project and it's bringing me back to, looking at young people and recognizing them, even just, whether it's in the art world or just like on the train or, on Orchard Street, these kids, just making their clothes from nothing and reinventing and doing sustainability, in their own practice. So, yeah, I mean, it's passing the torch and it's much deeper, like looking inside and looking outside, like sometimes in a Matisse painting, it's not just art, it's, how we should be living. So.
Thank you, Linda. That was really interesting because we've been talking about Jack and Jack says himself, that being able to look and to see is a skill set that people don't often utilize. And because Jack saw you, it was you recognized that as a skill that you wanted to embrace yourself.
Sure.
Yeah, I love that. So my next question is for Julie. You have done over the years a lot of teaching. In fact, I taught at one of your Christie's class, a session at one of your Christie's classes. So can you tell us how did Dr. Flam's pedagogy inform your own teaching? That's the question.
Yeah, this was a question that I hoped that you would ask me because I have spent most of the last 20 years teaching, and I mean, a couple of different things. When I was at Christie's Education, it was a master's program, and one of my jobs was I ran a thesis proposal workshop, and I had to help the students find a topic that they wanted to work on. And I always told them the story of my dissertation and how hard it was for me to get it through and how important it was that I worked on something that I was really interested in. Because my students were in this pre-professional program and they wanted to all get jobs in the art world, and they were always coming to me to say, like, oh, should I write this? Should I work on this? What would be the most strategic thing? And I would always tell them, well, don't try to do that because you don't even know if that's going to pan out. What will be important is if you have a lot of conviction and passion about something, that will be, an authentic contribution that you can make, and you'll bring other people along with you if you actually care about what you're working on. And so I think that was one thing that I really took away from your support of my dissertation. And the other thing was the the idea of respect for the artists. I mean, I took that primitivism and modern art class in I think the exhibition had only been maybe the year before. And I remember that you thought we were going to spend a lot of time talking about the controversy about the exhibition. But in the end, we didn't do that. We spent the first 7 weeks learning about African sculpture. And we didn't learn about it through the eyes of the modernists. We learned about African sculpture. And my midterm paper, I had to go to the Met and pick an object and research it. And I made a drawing of it on the cover. I don't know whether we were asked to make drawings, but I made one. But I felt like this idea of actually looking at what was in front of you, really looking at it, really responding to it. I would tell my students, because it was a master's program, it was kind of not that long of a program, 15 months, that often your most original contribution is going to be the way you describe something, how you see it. That's what I want to hear. And the students would write all around it. They felt like it was cheating to do a visual analysis. And I'd be like, no, that's not cheating. That's actually what I want to hear from you. And even now, I'm teaching students who are not art students. I'm teaching in people with environmental science backgrounds who want to know how art can be one of the pillars of sustainability, sociological, political, economic, and cultural. It's a cultural project. And I send these people out to go look at things and I make them write about what they see. And I feel like indirectly, then that's how I was trained, And I took a lot of Professor Flam's classes. I probably took all of them that were being offered when I was in grad school. So I do feel like I was really impacted. The program was in many ways turning toward more theory where the object wasn't central to the curriculum. And I was really interested in things, and I had a background as a studio artist. So I feel like I got sort of permission to continue to be interested in objects, and that's actually what I've really tried to teach my students.
Thank you. That beautifully stated, yeah. I'd like to ask you, Deborah, you and Jack share some professional experiences, teaching, writing, curating, leading artist-run organizations, working with artist estates. And I guess the question is, do you think, or do either of you or Jack think that art history should be seen as much more useful, much more central to not just education, but life, culture, community, than it is? And the other thing is you're both artist scholars too, right? You have that in common. So I guess, how can we do that? I mean, we're always trying to. You mentioned, Jack, that CAA has been really influential in helping people to see how art is so much more important than it is thought to be in terms of just one's growth as a thinking, feeling human being. But how do we advance that? Or do you have any thoughts on that concept, those ideas?
Thanks for that question. I think for me, I said that I was like really intimidated when I entered CUNY Grad Center, and I didn't feel like a scholar like everybody else was, and I wasn't an academic, and I think I was always thinking, and then there were other professors there who were very theoretical, as Julie said, and I got a little heady in some of that, and was thinking at some point I would do my dissertation on something out there that was very theoretical, and I fell down that rabbit hole and loved all that stuff. But at the same time, as I mentioned, I was working for the printmaking workshop, and I was like working as a barista in Soho, and like putting it together, because I didn't have any support to do the work that I wanted to do, and working at the printmaking workshop and working with Bob so closely and with artists making their work, and I had gone there to make prints, and then just wound up like administering it because I needed a job in the summer, and then just one thing led to another, and I was there, and I guess at some point when I realized that's what I would write my dissertation on, like it brought those two things together for me. And I realized that art history is not out there. No, it's here. Yeah. And yeah, no.
Well, yeah, I'd like to say something about theory. I am not anti-theory, although much of my career was spent teaching when many of my colleagues were emphasizing theory, sometimes at the expense of dealing with the works of art as works of art. But as I used to say to my students, and as I said to myself then too, repeatedly, in order to have a theory about something, you have to have an experience of something. Theories are based on experience. They're not based on other theories, so to speak. And so I've always felt that the most interesting theoretical writing has a basis in experience. Similarly, to get to your larger question, Lisa, which is a very challenging and interesting idea, which is I think that art, partly because it's nonverbal, and this is something that you explore in your book, The World Before Racism, that because when you're articulating things in words, you have certain kinds of patterns of thought that follow your formulation of the words, whereas with pictures, there's a broader context. And I think that one of the things that the experience of art can do for society is to make people more aware of how the complexity of life and of other people is worth taking into account, especially now in the current political situation in this country, to see the paradigm of art as a way of being able to connect with energies outside yourself that are nourishing energies and not destructive ones, among other things.
Yeah, I have always believed that pictures, particularly the historic images that are made in connection with different cultures' leadership, let's say, like royal artists or, you know, the ancient Egyptian court artists, or artists who are widely appreciated in their particular era. The fact that either the government or the religious leadership or whoever embraces a particular artist's work suggests that for that cultural period, historic period, that art mattered. And it is an expression of what mattered to that culture. Now, the thing, not that writings of that era can't have the same power and expressibility in terms of saying what that culture was really about, but as we all know, reading any kind of historic text, unless you are reading the original, you're playing telephone. You get a translation from another language. I try to look at you guys, but the lights are blinding, and you just look kind of blurry. And of course, teaching art history for 15 or 16 years at John Jay College of Criminal Justice was a true challenge because, as you can imagine, it's not the kind of institution where people had any great appreciation for the value of visual imagery as a expression of humanity. But I would argue, I have always argued, that the written word, and most of what we learn is written word, at least in the humanities, is so flawed because, for example, the difference between talking directly to someone and texting, the same word has 10 different connotations, you know. But the point is that written history is always being altered. We rarely go to primary sources. Most college textbooks, even my own, are secondary sources. You're reading about history through the filter of the author, of the editor, of the country that produced it. That is not the case with art, almost never. You are always looking at the original document, and it has not been translated, it has not been changed, it has not been reiterated, and so it tells much more of the truth about a particular age and a particular culture, about their thoughts and feelings, than any written word could ever do. So,
I'd like to add, there's also a kind of an intellectual content, because it is not explicitly stated necessarily, has a particular resonance. I think of a painting like Masaccio's Trinity in Santa Maria Novella, which one can read as a kind of a document, among other things, of a certain kind of humanism because of the use of perspective, by the relative positioning of the figures, et cetera, in a very vivid way that surpasses what often can be consciously stated in a text, because it is stated implicitly rather than explicitly.
So, sorry if you guys have more to say, but we have to take a minute and give the audience a chance to ask any and all questions related or unrelated to whatever was discussed today. If someone is brave enough to step up to the mic, we have about 15 minutes left. Don't blow your chance. Would you mind stepping up to the mic? Only because we're recording. I'm sorry, it's a little inconvenient, but necessary. We should be playing, like music.
Hi, I'm Nettie Heller. I studied with you for a year in 1998. So I know Robert Lee from other ways, and it's like he's sitting here. I didn't know that he studied with you in 1962, and he didn't know that I studied with you as well. I was very grateful to be able to study with you, graduate program MFA at Brooklyn College. So there was one course, connoisseurship, you taught, and then there was post-impressionism. I like what you just said about art history and studio art, that I didn't realize that public institutions were, that they were friends, of course, but how you just talked about it and left it so available. But as a studio art painting and drawing major, whatever, you gave us the opportunity, instead of writing a paper, to make a work of art. And instead of it was post-impressionism, and here we are, I was in Brooklyn, I did a painting, plein air, down by the Brooklyn waterfront, because I really like the ships and the barges and the idea of crossing to different cultures. Well, this was a crossing. I painted, and it was just an opportunity to Laura, you were talking about, given the opportunity of something else to grow, and art is life, and it is. I mean, it's fun. It's just fun to be part of the banter. And maybe it's visual banter, I don't know, but it's like it gives you opportunity to meet people in a different way, in the light of what you are, what the best of you is, and presenting and maybe bringing the best of who you're talking with, the respect. And so here it is. I made this painting. I did very well in your class, but it also ended up, I would put it in a show with a lot of nautical work. And somebody was very interested, and they asked me they wanted to commission me on some other piece. And I ended up selling not only that piece, but I had a commission and a wonderful little vacation by the sea. So I thank you for a lot. Just continuing life, and you were part of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the connoisseurship class, because this was a class that was completely undefined. And I used to say the first class meeting, this course is called connoisseurship, but it is not a course in connoisseurship, properly speaking. I inherited it. Alan D'Arcangelo, the artist, had taught it before I did. When Alan retired, it was given to me. And that was one of the most exciting courses I taught at Brooklyn College. And the reason was that after the first couple of weeks, I got an idea, which I then stuck with for the next several years, which is students would bring, they were almost all, at the beginning, all MFA students, mostly painters and sculptors. And I would ask them to bring their work to class, to the second class meeting. And I wanted them to talk about their own work as if they had not done it. In other words, talk about it as an object, as a work of art, getting back to my obsession with seeing what's there. And it was really fascinating because, of course, they would say, well, I was trying to, and I said, no, we don't know what you're trying to, because you're not the artist, remember? You're just talking about it. And by the end of the semester, people came away really enlightened. And I think they were enlightened by themselves. They weren't enlightened by me. They were enlightened by listening to each other talk about their own work as if they had not done the work. That was one of the most exciting courses I taught ever. The other, by the way, was at the Graduate Center, a course called Writing About Art, and which was a tough course to teach because I would have the students go to museums, galleries, and every week they had to write an essay for the course. And I had, of course, had to read them and mark them up. And the hardest part of teaching, as anybody who's taught knows, is reading papers. But there also, the results at the beginning, I used to get a lot of kind of jargon. And in fact, I got a very sweet, I can't resist this since this came up, a very sweet email from one of my students who lives out west now at the Graduate Center. And she said that she wasn't able to come. She said, this is a direct quote from her email, "Through our time together at CUNY, you laid the seeds of what it means to be a writer, which I follow to this day." And to me, that was so moving for her to say that. What it means to be a writer. It means something to be a writer. It means something to be an art historian. It means something to be an artist. And it means something to be seen, because these are all ways of making ourselves and the people and things we love be seen. So.
Do we have another question? Okay, come on down. No?
Yes.
Come. Oh, is there a mic there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm blinded. I told you.
Hi, my name's Jeannie McKetta. I'm a recent PhD from the University of Texas. I worked with Richard Schiff, who I saw was in one of your slides. And similarly, he has a background in studio, and so do I. And now that I'm teaching, looking is absolutely, it's the first thing. Noticing things, knowing that when you talk about something, that it's the physical thing that all of your statements should be pinnable to. So my question is, to all of the panel, do you remember a particular exercise? Or Dr. Flam, do you have an exercise that kind of gets students immediately immersed in close looking and careful articulation of their observations?
Should I start? Well, for me, it was asking people what they saw. general. And okay, so the Monet story, because it came up with another former student who mentioned it today. So I was teaching a course in 19th century French painting, which was one of my passions. And the first class meeting, I showed a slide of Monet's Olympia. And I said, what I'd like you all to do is to talk simply and only about what you see when you look at this painting. I had an agenda in the back of my mind, but I wanted them to go to certain places. And the first person raised her hand, and she said, and the fact that it was a she was interesting in this case, and she said, well, from a feminist point of view, and I said, no, 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 I don't want a feminist point of view. I want your point of view. I don't want any isms here. No ists or isms. And there was hell to pay. Oh my God, there was chaos. People were so antagonistic. They thought this guy is really awful. And Lisa was my research assistant at the time. And so the next time I saw her, which was only a couple of days after this class, I said, what do you think? And she said, Jack, because I think we were already on a firm basis then. She said, Jack, don't pay attention to it. They'll learn. That was because I was to be honest, I was hurt and chagrined, because I'd never had a reaction like that with the class. And I think one of the hardest things to do, what I tried to make people do, was what I tried unsuccessfully at the beginning of that course to do, was to see something and talk about what they're seeing, articulate what they're seeing. And then, only after they've been able to articulate what they are seeing physically, to then talk about, well, what does that mean? What are the resonances of meaning that come from what I just seen? And by the way, I can't resist saying this. If you were at the University of Texas and you studied with Richard Schiff, one of the most eye-opening books I've ever read is Richard's Serrone and the End of Impressionism, as an extended engagement with careful looking in an historical way. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I'll add that one of the things I learned from Jack's style of approaching art is, well, one of the things that I ended up doing was I write a lot of books on art history, and some of them have, over 100 artists, in a book. And before I write about any artists, before I research the artists, I write about the imagery. What I see, and I just look at the picture and I start writing. And when I'm finished with my 2 cents, then I go afterwards to see what other people said. And that allows me to not be derivative and to also either agree or disagree with the usual suspects in terms of commentary about a particular artist. And okay, I'm going to brag now. All my years of writing about artists, living artists, I've never got a complaint that I said the wrong thing. And I've had artists say, but how did you know that? That's exactly what I meant. And it comes from not reading what other people wrote before making up your own mind. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because that actually is the most important thing if you're studying art history, is to look first and then read. Whereas usually it's unfortunately often done, I should say, the other way around. Read first and then look.
It's 6:26, so we could have one more question. Yes.
Thank you so much. I always meant to say a few things about Jack. And on the way...
Would you introduce yourself?
Oh, hello. My name is Phong Bui, the publisher of the Brooklyn Rail.
Yes.
I was on the subway coming here, and I was reading on my iPhone. the wonderful letter that Melville wrote to his friend Hawthorne. It must have been in the summer 1850 when he decided that having prolonged excuses of not having the time to make the time to visit him, his friend. This is before the final chapter of Moby Dick. In that very end year, the Scarlet Letter was published. I seen the movie, but I never read the book until 3 weeks ago, the Scarlet Letter. Why I'm saying all this? Because it's a marvelous long letter where he described the hardship of how he had to mediate tending to the land, the corn, harvest, all the similar crop, day in, day out. It's a hard year, seasonally mindful, and only able to write at night. And he basically ranting against the idea of aristocracy of the brain. In order for us to do anything conceptually believing that democracy is about equality, we have to treat everything incrementally having equal worth. So with attend to the land, you know, all the things to do, and writing is the similar respect. And I think that is something that Jack has able to see in people, whether he's writing, running Dedalus Foundation, visiting artists, teaching, all of you here, everything is seemingly having that equal worth, almost like a Buddhist. I don't know. I grew up as a Buddhist, but I've come here and I've been reminded through Jack's friendship. So that's number one. Number two, his scholarship on Matisse rests so much on, I'm just also again, I love reading the iPhone, all the things to explore. Anxiety is a dizziness of freedom. And I think that's something that he's also able to detect that hid below the surface of a work of art, made object. Very important because he's able to embrace, support me when after Sandy, I think Hurricane Sandy happened October 2012, and it was Jack in that following year, in the summer of 2013, came and asked me whether I would consider to curate a show at Industry City. It was 15,000 square feet, and Jack said, Fong, if you would consider doing the show, commemorate this victim of Sandy, it would be scheduled for following fall, meaning the next 2 months, 3 months. And we came, and basically I saw the potential of Industry City, which had laid dormant in the last 25 years. And I saw the role play and fell in love with the romance of this potential show. And I essentially asked the management, if you have all the additional space, we can do a bigger show. So they called us the following week. Jack came with me, and I think Morgan's here too. Morgan's over there. So we saw the space, and they gave us 100,000 square feet. That is 3 times bigger than the original Whitney Museum. So we decided to do it. And we did it in 2 months and a half. The Dedalus Foundation, with Jack's leadership, gave us $700,000 and demand that Industry City would match it. So the show was it taught me something in that scale is a perception of a psychological mediation of conditions surrounding. In other words, you can do it, but you have to think of the space, that line between the negative and positive space. It's what my old friend Hakim Bey, who wrote the terrific books called TAZ, Temporary Autonomous Zone, where there's a condition of the time of the day where a dog can become a wolf. And I think that show was very profound because it's voted #1 show in New York City that year. It beat out the Mike Kelly retrospective, the Whitney Biennial, and Roberta Smith wrote the longest review and additional 54 other reviews. It changed the course of how I would mobilize the rail potential. So the scale that I essentially so grateful to Jack is no more, no less than a tiny little painting by Albert Pinkham Ryder, let's say Moonlight Marine, 11.5 by 11.5 inches at the Met. When Pollock was asked, among the American master, who you most admire, he says Albert Pinkham Ryder. And if you carefully, I think Pollock needed a big size in order to obtain or achieve that intimacy. So it's psychological because Ryder also have immensity in its rather compressed size. Yes. So I'm grateful to you, Jack. I can go on and go on about Jack, more than you ever thought of. But I'm grateful that you're here and talk so wonderfully about our friend and mentor, Jack Flam. And I'm just moved to have this opportunity to share that tiny little thing about Jack Flam, but it's really big. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a wonderful epilogue to the session. So thank you all for coming, and let's give one more round of applause for Dr. Flam.
The applause is not just for me, it's for them also.